Edith Marlow was 81 when the staff at Rosebank House began saying she was confused. Not cruelly at first. Cruelty in a care home rarely arrives with a raised voice. It comes padded in soft phrases, written in calm handwriting, spoken with a sympathetic tilt of the head. They said Edith Marlow was having a difficult week. They said she was misplacing things. They said grief had deepened old anxieties. They said age could make even the sharpest minds uncertain. And because Edith Marlow lived in room 12, because she walked with a frame, because her fingers trembled when she buttoned her cardigan, and because she had no children to stand in the doorway and demand answers, people believed the notes before they believed the woman. The trouble began with a missing medal. It was not worth much money. No auction house would have cared about it. The ribbon had faded, the metal had dulled, and small wooden box that held it had a crack near the hinge. But to Edith Marlow, it was not a trinket. It had belonged to her older brother, Walter, who had gone to sea as a boy and returned from naval service with silence, where laughter used to be. He had died long ago, still young enough that Edith sometimes felt older than her own memories of him. The medal sat with letters, a photograph, and a silver locket from Edith's late husband, Thomas Marlow. Those things were not valuables in the way insurance forms understand value. They were evidence. They proved that Edith Marlow had belonged to people before she became room 12. Then the box vanished. Edith Marlow told Claire Sutton, her key caregiver. Claire Sutton smiled with practiced warmth and said, "Of course, Edith. We'll have a proper look." By lunchtime, Claire Sutton had told the nurse that Edith was becoming fixated on missing belongings. By evening, the missing box had become a symptom. Soon, Edith's phone was often out of battery, though she charged it every night. Letters from Joan Fletcher, her oldest friend, did not reach her until weeks after they were written, if they reached her at all. Visits were gently discouraged because Edith was said to be too unsettled. When Edith complained, Claire Sutton placed a hand on her shoulder and told her that everyone wanted what was best. Those words frightened Edith more than anger would have. She had no children. Her husband had been dead for 12 years. Joan Fletcher lived in Brighton and could not drive. The people who should have protected Edith were busy, underpaid, cautious, or too willing to trust whichever adult held the clipboard. Edith's greatest fear was not dying in Rosebank House. It was being reduced, while still alive, to a sentence in someone else's file. Resident confused again. For months, almost everyone believed Claire Sutton. But Claire Sutton had mistaken old age for helplessness. She had mistaken a quiet care home for a place without memory. There were hallway cameras. There were visitor logs. There were medications records showing Edith's mind had not drifted the way Claire claimed. There were calls blocked on Edith's phone, property records changed after the fact, and pawnshop receipts a thief had hoped no one would ever ask to see. There was also a small blue diary hidden inside a large print copy of Middlemarch. Because Edith Marlow had once spent 30 years in a school office and understood the value of writing things down. Most of all, there was a young activities assistant named Hannah Price, who noticed something everyone else had found convenient to ignore. A supposedly confused woman should not have been able to correct the second verse of Tennyson from memory. Before Rosebank House, before the missing medal and the careful lies, Edith Marlow had lived in a narrow terraced house in Canterbury with lavender by the gate and too many books for the shelves. She had been a school secretary for 30 years, the kind who knew which child needed lunch money hidden in a folded permission slip, which parent needed a cup of tea before a difficult meeting, and which head teacher needed stopping before he made a foolish announcement in front of the governors. Edith had never been powerful in the official sense. Her name had not appeared on brass plaques. No one had given her awards. But entire school days had survived because Edith Marlow had known where every key was kept and which person needed kindness before discipline. Thomas Marlow had repaired clocks in a narrow workshop behind their kitchen. Their home ticked day and night. Mantel clocks, carriage clocks, grandfather clocks, watches in paper envelopes, little brass mechanisms no bigger than a coin. Thomas had always said time was never really lost. It was only misread, mishandled, or allowed to run down. After he died, Edith kept the clocks wound for 6 months. Then, one by one, she let them stop. The silence hurt, but winding them alone hurt more. She did not enter residential care because she had given up. That was important to Edith. She had fought to remain in her own house. After a fall broke her hip, she spent 8 weeks in hospital and rehabilitation, then returned home with carers, visiting morning and evening. At first, the arrangement worked. Edith made soup in batches, kept her pills sorted in a plastic tray, and telephoned Joan Fletcher every Sunday. But the winter after her fall was wet and vicious. One January morning, Edith dropped her medication behind the radiator and could not retrieve it. She waited 4 hours for help because the care visit had been delayed by staff sickness. She told Joan about it lightly, pretending annoyance rather than fear. Joan Fletcher heard what Edith did not say. Joan had been Edith's friend since they were 12. They had met in the cloakroom at school after Joan, newly arrived from Brighton, had been sick with nerves into her satchel. Edith had helped her clean it and told no one. That kind of beginning can last a lifetime. Joan was blunt, loyal, and not easily impressed by professionals who used warm voices to hide cold decisions. But Joan was 80 herself, with arthritis in both knees and a son in Australia who phoned dutifully but never at the right time. She could not move to Canterbury. She could not lift Edith from the floor if she fell. "Come nearer to me," Joan said more than once. "At least then I can be a nuisance properly." Edith resisted until the day she woke from a nap and realized she had not spoken aloud for 26 hours. Loneliness has many forms. Some are loud, some are empty, and some become practical. Edith sold the terraced house, keeping enough from the sale for fees and a little safety, and moved into Rosebank House in Kent because it looked respectable. The brochure showed raised garden beds, a conservatory bright with geraniums, a music room, visiting hairdresser, reminiscence activities, and staff who described care as family. Edith distrusted that word. Family was not something people became because a brochure said so. Still, the building smelled of polish rather than neglect, and the manager spoke clearly about care plans, medication, and dignity. Joan liked the garden. Edith liked the fact that the library trolley came on Wednesdays. Claire Sutton was assigned as Edith's key caregiver. Claire was 42, neat, efficient, and almost always smiling when families were present. She had the gift of appearing busy without seeming rushed. She remembered that Edith took weak tea with no sugar, that she preferred her gray cardigan on Sundays, and that the cushion behind her left hip had to be angled correctly. She laughed at Edith's dry remarks. She told Edith that residents without close family needed someone extra in their corner. Edith, who had spent years fearing she would become nobody's first thought, let that sentence warm her. Trust grew through small permissions. Claire offered to label Edith's cardigans because laundry was forever swallowing things. Claire helped organize drawers after cleaning staff mixed up her scarves. Claire took the old wooden keepsake box from Edith's suitcase and said it should not be left in an ordinary drawer because agency staff sometimes came and went. There was a wardrobe safe, Claire said. It would be better there. Edith hesitated. The box felt too private for anyone else's hands. Claire seemed to notice and softened her voice. I know what it's like to have things that mean more than money, Claire said. My Nan had a ring she never took off. You should not have to worry, Edith agreed. That was how Claire Sutton began. Not with force, with usefulness. For several weeks, nothing happened. Edith learned the rhythm of Rosebank House, breakfast at 8, medication round, newspapers in the lounge, exercises for those who tolerated them, lunch at 12:30, afternoon activities, tea, supper. Television in the lounge for those who did not want to sit alone with the length of the evening. Some residents were sharp, some were frail, some drifted in and out of their own histories. Edith tried not to judge the place by its worst moments. Care work was hard, and she knew what strain did to people. Still, she noticed things. A resident named Mrs. Elwood asked 3 times for her daughter, and was told 3 times that the daughter had phoned yesterday. Edith happened to know the daughter had not, because Mrs. Elwood told every visitor the details of every call. A man near the window never had his hearing aids in during group activities, then was described as refusing to engage. Staff wrote phrases like settled after reassurance, when what they meant was that a resident had stopped complaining. Edith did not think Rosebank House was wicked. That would have been simpler. It was worse in the ordinary way. It was a place where good intentions, staff shortages, fear of complaints and routine had formed a net. Most people did their best, some did not. The net hid both. The first missing item was Thomas Marlow's silver locket. It held 2 tiny photographs. Thomas at 26 in his workshop apron, and Edith at 19 on Brighton pier with wind in her hair and the kind of face she sometimes forgot, had been hers. She did not wear the locket often because the clasp was difficult, but she opened the wooden box sometimes just to check that it was there. One Thursday morning, after a bad dream about her old house, Edith asked Claire to help her retrieve the box from the safe. Claire said, the maintenance man had the master key because the safe batteries were being checked. Edith accepted this at first. A school secretary learns that maintenance men always have keys to something. The next day, Claire brought the box. Edith sat by the window and lifted the lid. The metal was there, the letters were there, the photograph was there, the locket was not. My locket, Edith said. Claire leaned over her shoulder. Are you sure you didn't wear it yesterday? I haven't worn it in months. Perhaps Joan helped you put it somewhere safe when she visited. Joan has not visited since I came here. Claire's smile did not disappear. It only changed shape. Let's not upset ourselves. Things turn up. The phrase bothered Edith. Not because it was rude. Because it was the sort of sentence people use when they have already decided not to look. Edith asked for the safe access log. Claire laughed lightly, as if Edith had made a charmingly formal request at a tea party. Oh, you and your school office ways. I'll ask. No log appeared. 2 days later, the locket had become a note in Edith's care file. Resident reports missing necklace. Reassured, possible misplacement. Monitor for anxiety. Edith did not see the note then, but she felt its effect. The nurse spoke to her more slowly. The deputy manager asked whether she was sleeping. Claire began using phrases like, "when you get muddled," and "if your memory is playing tricks." Each phrase landed softly. Each left a bruise. Edith began writing things down. Joan had given her a small blue diary before the move. "For appointments," Joan had said. "And for insults, you always remember those best." Edith had laughed then. Now she opened the diary at night when the corridor grew quiet and wrote in the careful hand she had used on school registers. Thursday, asked for wooden box. Claire said maintenance had master key. Friday, box returned. Thomas's locket missing. Claire suggested I wore it. I did not. Asked for safe log. No answer. She hid the diary inside Middlemarch because the book was thick, plain, and more respected than read. It sat on her bedside table like a harmless monument to seriousness. The next weeks brought smaller disturbances. Her phone, which she charged nightly, was dead by mid-morning. A letter from Joan arrived, opened, with the corner torn. A cardigan she disliked appeared in her wardrobe, while her preferred gray one vanished for a week. Once, Edith found her drawer rearranged, letters separated from photographs, the small order of her life broken and remade by someone else's hands. Claire explained everything. Laundry mistake, post mishandled, cleaning, routine safety check. Residents often moved items and forgot. Edith must not worry. Worry was bad for her. The more Edith objected, the more carefully Claire wrote her into unreliability. That was the second theft. The medal disappeared on a Monday in late March. Edith had asked for the wooden box after breakfast because Walter's birthday would have been the next day. She wanted to hold the medal while she remembered him properly. She expected the locket to still be missing. She did not expect the medal to be gone too. For one moment she did not speak. The empty space in the box seemed larger than the medal itself. Claire stood near the wardrobe with folded towels in her arms. "It was here," Edith said. Claire did not come close enough to look. "What was, love?" "My brother's medal," Claire sighed. Not loudly. Loud sighs can be accused. This was a delicate sound, almost sorrowful. "Edith, we looked at that box only last week. It was there." "Perhaps you gave it to Joan. I did not." "Perhaps you moved it because you were worried." "I did not." Claire put down the towels and came to her side. "You are upsetting yourself." "My brother's medal has been taken. Nobody here would take from you." "Then find it." Claire's face hardened for only a second. Edith saw it and felt cold. By the afternoon, the nurse on duty had been told Edith was distressed and fixating on military memorabilia. The deputy manager, Sandra Wells, visited room 12 with a clipboard and a concerned smile. Sandra had worked in care for 20 years and had learned how to say very little while sounding thorough. She asked Edith whether she knew what day it was. Edith answered. Sandra asked who the Prime Minister was. Edith answered with a comment about wishing she did not know. Sandra laughed uneasily and wrote something down. "Have you been feeling more anxious lately?" Sandra asked. "I am anxious because things are missing." "Of course. But sometimes anxiety can make objects feel very important." "They are important." "Yes, emotionally." The word emotionally did a great deal of work. It separated the facts from Edith's feelings and put all the weight on the feelings. Edith folded her hands. "I want an inventory of my property." Sandra said they would review the matter. Claire later told another caregiver in the corridor that Edith was spiraling. Edith heard the word through the half-open door. That night she wrote it down. After the medal vanished, Joan Fletcher's calls became unreliable. Every Sunday at 4, Joan phoned. It had been that way for years, through Thomas's illness, Joan's knee operation, Edith's house sale, and all the weather in between. At first, after Edith moved into Rosebank House, calls continued. Then, in April, the phone stopped ringing. Edith tried calling Joan, but sometimes the number would not connect. Sometimes the phone said battery low, though it had charged all night. Sometimes she found it in her drawer instead of by her chair. Once, when she finally reached Joan, the call ended after 3 minutes. The screen went black. Claire found Edith tapping the dead phone. "You must have forgotten to charge it. I charged it." "All right. Don't worry. These little phones are tricky." "It is not tricky. It is dead." Claire took it from her. "I'll sort it." The phone came back 2 hours later. Joan's number had been moved lower in the contacts list. A care home number sat at the top. Edith noticed because secretaries notice ordering. She wrote it down. Joan, meanwhile, was becoming frightened in Brighton. She called Rosebank House and was told Edith was resting. Edith was at lunch. Edith was in activities. Edith was having a difficult day. Joan wrote letters. Edith did not mention them. Joan began to wonder whether Edith was too proud to say she was deteriorating. That thought hurt. Pride had always been one of Edith's less convenient virtues. In May, Joan took a train to Kent and a taxi from the station to Rosebank House. She carried a paper bag of lemon biscuits because Edith despised the dry ones care homes gave out. At reception, Claire Sutton happened to be passing. "Joan," Claire said warmly, "what a lovely surprise. I wrote that I was coming. Did you? Oh, I am sorry. Edith is rather unsettled today. I would still like to see her." Claire lowered her voice. "She refused a visit this morning. We must respect her wishes." "From whom?" "She didn't say. She was quite agitated. I have known Edith for 68 years. Let me ask her myself." Claire's sympathy cooled. "We can't distress residents because visitors insist." Joan stood in the foyer with lemon biscuits in her hand while a woman half her age used the language of rights to keep her from the only person she had come to see. Sandra Wells emerged, repeated that Edith needed calm, and suggested Joan phone before traveling next time. Joan did not shout. She was of a generation that had been taught not to make scenes in reception areas. She left. Edith was never told Joan had come. In the visitor log, the entry read, "Joan Fletcher. Visit declined by resident. Resident tired and unsettled." Claire Sutton signed the note. That evening, Edith asked whether there had been any post. Claire said no. By early summer, Edith understood that the problem was bigger than the missing medal. It had become a system of small erasures. Her complaints were rewritten as confusion. Her requests became anxiety. Her friend became a disturbance. Her phone became evidence of her inability to manage technology. If Claire said a thing in the right tone, the thing became plausible. If Edith protested in distress, the distress became proof. This was what frightened her most. Not that Claire had stolen an object, though that was painful. Not even that Rosebank House failed to investigate, though that angered her. What frightened Edith was how quickly an old person's reality could be overruled when another adult claimed to be caring. She had once kept school records. She knew how institutions protect themselves, not by lying all at once, but by creating paper that makes a different version of events easier to believe. So she made her own paper. The diary grew: dates, times, names, exact phrases. Phone battery full at 9 p.m., dead at 10 a.m. Joan's letter opened. Gray cardigan missing, later returned from laundry, though no laundry day. Claire said I had already checked box. I had not. Claire said Joan did not call. Joan always calls Sunday. Edith also began testing herself. Every morning she wrote the date without looking. She listed the breakfast items. She wrote 3 words and checked at night whether she remembered them. Lavender, clock, rope. She wrote down which poems she could recite, which prayers she remembered, which residents had visitors. It was not vanity. It was survival. Memory is not perfect, and Edith knew that. She forgot where she placed her glasses. She sometimes repeated a question. She once called a new resident by the wrong name. But she knew the difference between ordinary forgetfulness and having the world moved behind your back. Hannah Price arrived in July. She was 24, with dark hair, often escaping its clip, and a face too open for Rosebank House's practiced calm. She had cared for her grandmother through vascular dementia and had taken the activities assistant job because she wanted to do something meaningful before deciding whether to train as an occupational therapist. She ran poetry mornings, music afternoons, memory boxes, chair exercises, and the occasional quiz that residents tolerated because biscuits were involved. On Hannah's first poetry morning, she read Tennyson from a printed sheet. Her voice was pleasant, but nerves made her stumble over a line. Edith, sitting near the back in her gray cardigan, corrected her sharply. Hannah blinked. Some staff might have been embarrassed. Claire, who was arranging cups near the trolleys, smiled in a way that suggested Edith was being difficult. But Hannah laughed. "Thank you," she said. "I knew someone here would save me." Edith, surprised by gratitude instead of correction, continued. She recited the next lines from memory, her voice thin at first and then steady. Several residents listened. One nodded in time. Hannah lowered her paper and let Edith finish. Afterward, Hannah brought tea to room 12. "You know that poem very well," she said. "I learned it in 1958. That is longer than I have been alive. Most things are." Hannah smiled. "Do you remember a lot of poetry?" "I remember what matters." The sentence came out sharper than Edith intended. Hannah did not retreat. "Are there things people say you don't remember?" Edith studied her. She had become cautious with kindness. Kindness could be genuine, or it could be a tool in someone else's hand. "People say many things," Edith said. Hannah nodded as if that were an answer worth respecting. "My grandmother used to say the same." That was the beginning. Hannah did not declare belief. Big declarations would have sounded young and unreliable. She came back 2 days later with a poetry book. Edith corrected another line. Hannah began asking Edith to help choose readings. Then one afternoon, when Claire was off shift and the corridor was quiet, Edith said, "I have written things down." Hannah did not ask. "Why?" she asked. "Would you like me to read them?" Edith took Middlemarch from the bedside table and opened it to the hidden diary. Hannah read the first pages standing by the window. By the 3rd entry, she sat down. By the 10th, she stopped smiling. "This is a lot," she said. "It is what happened. I believe that you believe it." Edith's face closed. Hannah saw the mistake and corrected herself. "No, I'm sorry. That sounded like staff training, and not the good kind. I mean, I need to understand how to help properly." Edith looked at her for a long time. Then she turned to the page about Joan's visit. Hannah read it twice. "You were not told Joan came?" "No. There is a visitor log." "I know. Would you allow me to check some dates?" Edith's hand tightened on the diary. "And then what?" "Then we will know if the dates match." It was the word "we" that made Edith hand over the notebook. Hannah Price's first investigation was not dramatic. It was a young woman staying late for half an hour and comparing records she was allowed to see. Activities attendance showed Edith had attended a music session on a day Claire described her as too agitated for visitors. The visitor log showed Joan Fletcher's visit, declined by resident request, but there was no corresponding care note showing Edith had been asked. On another date, Claire had written that Edith had refused lunch because she was distressed about stolen property. The kitchen record showed Edith ate soup, bread, and pudding in the dining room with 2 other residents. These were small contradictions, not proof of theft, but they were proof that the paper version of Edith was not reliable. Hannah took her concerns to Sandra Wells. Sandra listened with the exhausted patience of someone who had learned to survive complaints by absorbing them. "Hannah, you are new," Sandra said. "I know. Claire has worked here 8 years. I know. Residents do become confused about belongings. Edith has written dates. Some of them do not match our records." Sandra leaned back. "That may mean Edith wrote them incorrectly. It may. But Joan Fletcher's visit was logged as refused, and Edith says she was never told. Families often misunderstand. Joan traveled by train and taxi." Sandra's mouth tightened. "We are short-staffed, Hannah. I cannot open an internal dispute because a new activities assistant has taken up a resident's anxiety. She says her medal is missing. She says many things are missing. That is the point." Sandra's voice softened, which made it worse. "You cared for your grandmother. I respect that, but you must not project. Residents attach meaning to objects. Sometimes they hide them. Sometimes they give things away and forget. We support them. We do not feed distress." Hannah left the office feeling foolish and angry. That evening, Claire was especially friendly to her in the staff room. "Don't let Edith get under your skin," Claire said while stirring instant coffee. "She can be very convincing. Breaks your heart, really. She was probably formidable once." "She still is," Hannah said. Claire laughed. "You'll learn." The next week, Hannah found that Edith's poetry group attendance had been changed in the system. A session she remembered Edith attending now showed Edith absent. Hannah asked another staff member, who shrugged and said errors happened. Hannah began keeping her own notes at home, careful and factual. She did not write accusations. She wrote dates. She wrote who said what. She wrote where records differed. Then she called the local safeguarding advice line anonymously. She expected to be told to follow internal procedure. Instead, the advisor asked calm questions. Was the resident an adult with care and support needs? Yes. Was there an allegation of theft? Yes. Was there possible isolation from contacts? Yes. Were concerns being dismissed because of assumed confusion? Yes. Was there a record of the resident's capacity? Not recent. Was there a complaints process? Yes, but it was being filtered through staff implicated in the concern. The advisor did not tell Hannah to become a detective. She told her to document facts, encourage Edith to express her wishes clearly, and escalate if management failed to respond. She explained adult safeguarding, financial abuse, coercive control, and the importance of not assuming that age equals incapacity. She also said something Hannah wrote down afterward. Do not let concern for the institution outrank the adult at risk. Hannah carried that sentence like a match in her pocket. The next step came from Edith herself. She asked to see her GP. Claire said the GP was very busy. Sandra said the request would be noted. The manager, Patricia Rowe, said Edith could speak to the nurse first. Edith said she wanted her GP because people were questioning her memory. That request could not easily be refused without making Rosebank House look exactly as controlling as Edith feared. Dr. Patel came on a wet Thursday morning. He had known Edith before Rosebank House. He remembered Thomas's clocks because he had once brought in his father's broken watch. Dr. Patel was not sentimental, But he was attentive. He asked Edith about the missing objects. He asked her to describe the sequence. He asked about Joan. He asked about her medication, sleep, pain, and mood. He performed a brief cognitive assessment, then spoke with her privately. "Do you feel safe here?" he asked. Edith looked toward the door. That was enough for him to close it properly. "I feel managed," she said. "By whom? Claire Sutton. And by everyone who believes Claire Sutton." Dr. Patel did not write that Edith was perfectly sharp. That would have been untrue and unnecessary. He wrote that Edith Marlow showed mild age-related forgetfulness, but gave a consistent account of concerns, understood the nature of her belongings and relationships, and appeared to have capacity to make decisions about property, visitors, communication, and complaints. He wrote that allegations of missing items and restricted contact should not be dismissed on the basis of age alone. He recommended a review of property records and safeguarding consideration. The note changed the temperature in Rosebank House. Not publicly. Staff still smiled. Tea still arrived. The television still murmured in the lounge. But something in the management office tightened. Patricia Rowe called Sandra in. Sandra called Claire. Claire emerged looking calm enough to be dangerous. That evening, Claire came to Edith's room without knocking. "I hear you've been telling the doctor stories." I told him what happened. "You have to be careful, Edith. Accusations can hurt innocent people. So can theft." Claire shut the door. "You think because Hannah likes your poems, she understands care? She is a child. She will leave when she gets bored. We are the ones here at night when you press the bell. We are the ones who clean you when you are ill. We are the ones who know what really happens." Edith's mouth went dry. "Open the door." Claire smiled. "It is open." It was not. Claire had closed it. "Open the door," Edith said again. For a moment, Claire did nothing. Then she opened it with exaggerated calm. "There. No need to make a scene." Edith waited until she left. Then she wrote every word in the diary. The next day, Claire removed the bell cord from Edith's reach during a bed change and did not return it for 40 minutes. Edith could see it looped over the chair, useless as a ribbon. When another caregiver finally came in, Edith said nothing. She did not yet know whom to trust. That night she wrote it down too. Hannah found the entry and went pale. "That is neglect," she said. "It is a warning," Edith replied. Joan Fletcher, after weeks of failed calls and evasive answers, finally reached Edith through Hannah's personal phone during an activities session. Hannah should not have done it that way. She knew that. But she also knew Edith had clearly asked to speak to Joan, and every official route had somehow failed. When Edith heard Joan's voice, she did not cry. Her face changed as if a window had opened in a stale room. "Edith," Joan said, "tell me the truth. Do you not want me to visit? Who told you that? They said you refused. I was not told you came." There was silence on the line. Then Joan Fletcher, who had spent most of her life being blunt enough to frighten committees, said in a voice Edith had never heard before, "I am coming, and I am not coming alone." Joan arrived the following week with her nephew, Martin Fletcher. Martin was a solicitor in Brighton, not a dramatic courtroom sort, but a careful man who handled wills, powers of attorney, property disputes, and the slow practical troubles of ordinary families. He had known Edith since childhood as Aunt Joan's clever friend who corrected grammar in Christmas cards. He came expecting perhaps a misunderstanding, perhaps poor communication, perhaps one elderly woman frightened and another elderly woman furious. He did not come expecting a crime. That changed when Edith showed him the diary. Martin read slowly. Lawyers are trained to distrust both panic and charm. The diary impressed him because it contained neither. It contained dates, times, phrases, and corrections. It also contained admissions of uncertainty. Not sure if gray cardigan went to laundry. Need check. Phone dead again, though charged. Could be battery, asked Hannah. Those notes mattered. They showed Edith was not simply inventing certainty. She was testing reality. Martin asked to see the care home's complaints procedure, property inventory, safe access records, visitor logs, and policies on resident communication. Patricia Rowe, the manager, became polished and defensive. She said Rosebank House took all concerns seriously. She said Edith was a valued resident. She said staff were under pressure. She said Claire Sutton was experienced and well-regarded. She said accusations of theft were serious. That is why we are treating them seriously, Martin said. Claire was not present at that meeting, but by supper she knew enough to change tactics. She became tender. She brought Edith extra custard. She tucked a blanket around her knees in the lounge. She told another resident, within Edith's hearing, that some families stirred up distress for their own reasons. She said, old people without close relatives could be especially vulnerable to outside influence. The sentence was aimed not at Edith, but at the room. It planted the idea that Joan and Martin were using Edith, not protecting her. Edith watched residents glance at her and then away. That was another kind of theft. Claire was stealing the sympathy in the air. Martin sent a formal letter the next day. It requested preservation of all records relating to Edith Marlow, including property records, incident notes, care notes, visitor logs, safe access records, internal messages where relevant, and CCTV footage for dates linked to missing property. He also raised an adult safeguarding concern with the local authority, citing possible financial abuse, psychological abuse, neglect, and restriction of contact. Rosebank House management became suddenly attentive. For the first time, staff knocked before entering Edith's room. Her phone remained charged. Joan's calls came through. Sandra Wells asked whether Edith needed anything, with the strained brightness of someone hoping kindness could retroactively become evidence. Claire Sutton went on 2 days' leave. Those 2 days were the safest Edith had felt in months. But safety did not mean peace. Edith was exhausted by being believed only after paperwork arrived. She found herself trembling at ordinary sounds. The medicine trolley, footsteps outside her door, the click of the laundry cart. She had not realized how much of her strength had gone into staying precise. Joan visited twice in 1 week. The second time, she brought lemon biscuits and anger wrapped in a floral scarf. I should have pushed harder, Joan said. You were pushed away. I let myself be. You are 80, Joan, not a cavalry regiment. I could have behaved more like one. Edith smiled for the first time in days. Joan took her hand. Did you think I stopped caring? No. Did you? Edith looked at their hands. I wondered if they had made caring too inconvenient. Joan's eyes filled. Never again. The safeguarding process moved slowly, and that slowness became its own trial. People imagine that once someone says safeguarding, doors open and villains confess. Real life prefers forms. A social worker arranged to speak with Edith. Rosebank House conducted an internal review. Patricia Rowe promised cooperation while reminding everyone that staff reputations mattered too. CCTV had retention limits. Some footage had already been overwritten. Property inventories were incomplete. Safe access logs existed, but not consistently. The old manager had used one system, the new one another. Agency staff complicated matters. Everyone seemed to have an explanation ready before the facts had finished arriving. Claire returned to work, but was moved away from Edith's direct care pending review. She told colleagues she was being punished because a lonely resident had made wild claims and a family solicitor wanted trouble. Some believed her. Some pretended not to have an opinion. In care homes, loyalty can form around whoever makes the next shift easier. Hannah Price became unpopular in small ways. The staff room went quiet when she entered. Her name disappeared from a weekend rota she had requested. Someone moved her activity supplies to a cupboard by the laundry. Claire never confronted her directly. She did something more effective. She made Hannah look dramatic. Bless her, she wants to save everyone. Hannah heard Claire say one afternoon. Hannah went home and cried in her car. The next morning, she came back. She brought a ring binder. Inside were copies of attendance sheets, her own activity notes, dates from Edith's diary that Edith had permitted her to copy, and a timeline. Hannah did not give the binder to everyone. She gave it to Martin Fletcher when he asked whether she could provide a factual statement. She wrote only what she had seen, not what she suspected. She wrote that Edith recited poetry accurately. She wrote that Edith requested contact with Joan. She wrote that records did not match events she personally remembered. She wrote that she had raised concerns internally. Martin read it and said, "This is careful." Hannah, who had expected to be told she was foolish, nearly cried again. The first major break came from the visitor log. Martin obtained a copy under the formal complaints process. Joan's May visit was clearly marked as declined by resident request. Claire Sutton had signed. There was no care note stating Edith had been informed, no nurse entry, no record of agitation before the visit. The activities record showed Edith had attended a crossword session that morning and had been described by Hannah as engaged, humorous, corrected spelling of accommodate. The contradiction was almost absurd. Then Martin compared calls. Joan's phone bills showed repeated calls to Edith's mobile. Edith's phone showed some of those numbers had been blocked, then unblocked later. Edith did not know how to block a number. Hannah did not. Joan certainly had not. Claire had taken the phone several times to sort it. Rosebank House said staff should not alter residents' personal phones without consent. Claire said Edith had asked for help because nuisance calls upset her. Edith denied it. The phone became another contested object. But contested objects, when placed together, formed a pattern. The second break came from Dr. Patel. He provided a written note confirming his assessment and the need not to dismiss Edith's concerns as confusion. He also reviewed medication records. Edith was not on medication likely to cause severe hallucinations or sudden paranoia. She had pain, poor sleep, and anxiety, but those were understandable in context. Her accounts remained consistent across appointments. The phrase "consistent account" became important. Claire's version required Edith to be unreliable in exactly the ways that protected Claire. The records did not support that. The third break came by accident. Hannah was setting up a memory box session and needed spare fabric from the staff storage cupboard. The cupboard was in a back corridor near the laundry, usually locked, full of continence supplies, old decorations, broken frames, and things nobody wanted responsibility for. Sandra gave Hannah the key because she was on the phone and distracted. Behind a stack of unopened pads, Hannah saw a small wooden box. She knew it before she touched it because Edith had described the crack near the hinge. For a moment, Hannah did nothing. She was suddenly aware that touching it wrong could matter. She closed the cupboard, went back to the office, and asked Sandra to come with her. Sandra was irritated until she saw the box. Then all the color left her face. They opened it in Patricia Rowe's office with Martin on speakerphone and Edith's permission. Inside were Walter's medal, the wartime letters, the photograph from Brighton Pier, Joan's old postcards, and a folded handkerchief Edith had embroidered at 15. Thomas's silver locket was missing. Edith was not in the room when they found it. Martin insisted the discovery be documented before anyone presented it to her. Photographs were taken. The cupboard location was recorded. Staff access was noted. Patricia Rowe spoke in phrases like deeply concerning and full cooperation. Sandra kept saying she had never seen the box before. Hannah went to Edith afterward. She did not rush. She did not smile, as if returning stolen property erased the theft. She knocked, entered, and sat down. "They found the box," she said. Edith closed her eyes. "The medal? Yes. The letters? Yes. The locket?" Hannah shook her head. Edith nodded once. "I knew." When the box was placed in her lap, Edith touched the medal, but did not lift it. She looked at the objects, as if they were survivors returned from a war no one else had seen. Then she said, "Where was it?" Hannah told her. Edith did not ask why a confused woman would hide her own keepsake box in a locked staff cupboard behind continence supplies. She did not need to. Everyone else would have to ask it now. The police became involved after Martin traced the locket. He contacted dealers in the area with photographs. A small shop in Maidstone responded. The locket had been sold 3 months earlier. The dealer had followed identification requirements and kept a copy of the seller's ID. The name was Claire Sutton. CCTV showed Claire at the counter, her hair tied back, her expression ordinary. She had signed a receipt claiming the item was hers to sell. Claire denied theft when questioned. She said Edith had given her the locket as a gift during a sentimental conversation. She said Edith often spoke of having no family and wanting Claire to have something personal. She said she had sold it only because she was desperate after her son had asked for help with rent. She said she intended to tell Edith but became frightened when Edith forgot giving it. This story might have had power if not for the wooden box in the staff cupboard, the blocked calls, the visitor log, the diary, the GP note, and the fact that Claire had never mentioned any gift until after the dealer produced her ID. Then the investigation widened. Other families heard whispers. A daughter asked about a missing brooch that had been dismissed as misplacement. A nephew asked why his uncle's watch had disappeared before anyone called him. A resident who had been described as paranoid about staff handling cash was found to have made similar complaints about Claire. Not every concern proved theft, but enough did to show that Edith had not been an isolated inconvenience. She had been the one who kept writing. Claire Sutton's motive was both ordinary and ugly. She had debts from a failed relationship. She had borrowed money from short-term lenders. Her son had indeed needed help, though not always for rent. She felt underpaid, unseen, and resentful of residents whose small possessions represented lives that still seemed more cherished than hers. But need was only part of it. Claire also enjoyed becoming necessary. She liked holding the keys to people's rooms, phones, families, and fears. She liked deciding which version of a resident reached the official record. With residents who had close families, she was careful. With residents like Edith, she became bold. Edith's lack of children had not made her less loved. It had made Claire believe love would be harder to prove. The safeguarding meeting took place in a council building, with beige walls and tea that tasted of paper cups. Edith attended with Joan and Martin. She wore her gray cardigan, a blue blouse, and Thomas's replacement pendant, which Joan had bought before anyone knew whether the original would ever return. Patricia Rowe attended for Rosebank House along with Sandra Wells. A local authority safeguarding officer chaired. A police officer joined for part of the meeting. Hannah provided a statement but was not asked to sit through everything. Edith had dreaded the meeting. She imagined people discussing her as if she were absent. She imagined legal words moving too quickly. She imagined Claire's voice, sweet and injured, turning the room. Claire was not present. Her representative had provided a written statement denying intentional wrongdoing. The safeguarding officer began by asking Edith if she wanted to speak. Edith looked at the table. Martin had told her she did not need to make a speech. Joan had told her she could kick him under the table if anyone patronized her. Edith placed both hands around her teacup. "I want people to stop saying I was confused when I was frightened," she said. No one moved. "I forget words sometimes. I lose my glasses. I ask the same question if I am tired. That is not the same as not knowing when my brother's medal is gone. It is not the same as not knowing when my friend has been kept from me. It is not the same as giving away my husband's locket to a woman who would not let me see the safe log." The police officer wrote something down. Sandra Wells looked at her lap. Patricia Rowe's face held professional sorrow, but Edith no longer trusted expressions presented at meetings. The evidence was reviewed. The diary, the visitor log, Joan's travel receipt from the refused visit, activities attendance sheets, Dr. Patel's note, phone records showing blocked calls, photos of the wooden box in the staff cupboard, the dealer's receipt, CCTV from the pawn shop. Corridor footage from Rosebank House showing Claire leaving Edith's room during a night shift carrying a small cloth bag. There was no camera in Edith's room. There should not have been. But the corridor remembered what the room could not show. Claire's pattern with other residents was discussed in careful terms. Not all details could be shared with Edith. She understood. Privacy did not cease to matter because harm had occurred. Still, she heard enough. She had not imagined the shape of the danger. Rosebank House accepted that its response had failed. The phrase sounded too small to Edith. Failed was a tidy word. It did not include nights. Without a bell cord, Joan turned away in receptions, staff calling her muddled while stolen memories sat behind supplies. But Martin squeezed her hand under the table. Formal words, he had explained, could become useful later. Outrage had its place. So did admissions. After the meeting, Patricia Rowe approached Edith. "Mrs. Marlow," she said, though everyone usually called residents by first names, "I am deeply sorry." Edith studied her. "For what exactly?" Patricia's face flickered. "For the distress caused. Distress is what people say when they do not wish to name harm." Joan looked down to hide a grim smile. Patricia swallowed. "For not taking your concerns seriously, for allowing staff assumptions about confusion to influence our response, for failing to protect your property and your contact with Joan Fletcher." Edith nodded once. "That is closer." She did not forgive Patricia, not then. But she took the corrected sentence with her like a small, hard coin. The consequences came in layers, and none of them arrived quickly enough for the people who wanted a clean ending. Claire Sutton was suspended first, then she was dismissed. Later, after police interviews and further review, she was charged in connection with theft and fraud-related offenses, tied not only to Edith Marlow, but to other residents whose complaints had once been filed away as confusion. The local paper did not print Edith's name, but everyone in the area knew Rosebank House had become the care home under investigation. Some families demanded answers. Others defended the place because guilt becomes frightening when it has chosen the same building as someone you love. Claire did not collapse into confession. She denied, minimized, and explained. She said she had been under stress. She said Rosebank House had left staff unsupported. She said Edith had become emotionally attached and then resentful. She said she had meant to return the locket money. She said the wooden box must have been moved by someone else. Her words changed shape depending on the question, but the center remained the same. She had done wrong, yet she wanted the wrong to sound like pressure, misunderstanding, or sadness. Edith listened to Martin explain this over the telephone and felt a cold sort of recognition. Claire was still trying to control the record. Rosebank House tried to do the same, though with more careful language. Patricia Rowe wrote to families, saying the home had identified isolated concerns involving a former member of staff and was cooperating fully. Martin read the letter to Edith, and Edith asked him to read the word isolated again. Isolated, Edith said. That is a very small word for a locked cupboard full of someone's memories. Martin advised patience. Formal findings mattered. Regulatory processes mattered. Police processes mattered. Compensation discussions mattered. Edith understood that. She had spent her life with files, registers, and signatures. But understanding a process does not make it less painful to sit inside it. For weeks, she remained at Rosebank House while arrangements were made for a move. That period was almost harder than the original harm. Before, she had at least known she was fighting something hidden. Now everyone knew, and the building became a theater of discomfort. Some staff avoided her because they had believed Claire. Some overcorrected, calling Edith dear with too much brightness and asking after her comfort every 10 minutes. A few apologized quietly. One-night caregiver, a woman who had once repeated Claire's comments about Edith being muddled, stood in the doorway and said she had been wrong. Edith looked at her and waited. I should have asked more questions, the woman said. Yes, Edith replied. The woman nodded, and Edith respected that she did not ask to be comforted. Sandra Wells continued working for several weeks while the investigation reviewed her conduct. She came to Edith's room once with a form about property records. Her hands shook slightly. I never meant for you to feel unheard, Sandra said. Edith looked at the paper in Sandra's hand. Feeling unheard was not the problem. Being unheard was the problem. Sandra's eyes reddened. I thought I was protecting you from distress. You were protecting yourself from inconvenience. It was a hard sentence, and Edith did not regret it. Old women are often expected to make the truth softer for people who failed them. Edith had spent too many months having her sharp edges called symptoms. That evening, she worried she had been cruel. Joan told her she had been accurate. Hannah Price struggled too. She had become a minor hero in other people's retellings, which made her uncomfortable. Heroes were allowed to be brave after the danger was clear. Hannah had been frightened the whole time. She had worried about losing her job. She had wondered whether she was overreacting. She had gone home more than once and heard Claire's voice in her head saying she wanted to save everyone. On her final day at Rosebank House, Hannah came to Edith's room with a poetry book and a small pot of lavender. I am leaving, she said. I know. Joan told me. She is terrible with secrets. Hannah smiled, then looked at the floor. I feel as if I am abandoning people. You are leaving a place that punished you for noticing. There are residents still here. Then take what you learned and become dangerous somewhere larger. Hannah laughed. Through tears. You make safeguarding sound like piracy. It may require some piracy. They read Tennyson together one more time. Hannah stumbled deliberately over the line Edith had corrected months before. Edith narrowed her eyes. Do not mock an old woman with standards, she said. Never. Hannah left the lavender on the windowsill. Edith watered it faithfully until the day she moved. Joan found the new care home near Brighton after rejecting 4 others with the efficiency of a woman examining enemy fortifications. Houseman smelled of bleach and despair. One had a receptionist who spoke about residents as if they were furniture. One had a beautiful garden, but no clear answer about personal property. The 4th told Joan that families sometimes became too involved. Joan stood up before the tour ended. The 5th was smaller, imperfect, and honest. The manager admitted staff turnover had been difficult the previous year. She showed Joan and Martin the complaints process without being asked. She explained how property was photographed and logged, with the resident present. She said residents could nominate friends, not only relatives, as primary contacts. She asked Edith directly where she wanted her reading chair placed. That question decided it. The move took place on a gray Thursday. Edith had thought she would feel relief leaving Rosebank House, but as the car pulled away, she felt something more complicated. The building had harmed her, yet it had also contained the fight that proved she was still herself. Trauma can attach a person even to the place of injury. She watched the windows slide past and wondered how many residents behind them were still being politely disbelieved. Joan reached across the seat and squeezed her hand. No looking noble, Joan said. You are allowed to be furious. I am too tired for fury. Then borrow some of mine. I have surplus. At the new home, Edith's room overlooked a small courtyard with 2 benches and a stubborn hydrangea. Staff photographed the medal, the letters, the old postcards, the replacement pendant, and the blue diary at Edith's request. They did not laugh when she asked for copies of the inventory. They did not say she was anxious. They said that was sensible. The first night, Edith slept badly. Every unfamiliar sound became possible danger. A trolley in the corridor, a door closing, soft shoes passing. At 2 in the morning, she pressed the call bell because she had convinced herself it might not work. A caregiver named Miriam came within 3 minutes. Did you need something, Edith? Edith looked at her. I needed to know someone would come. Miriam nodded, as if that were a perfectly reasonable need. Then I came. After Miriam left, Edith cried for the first time since the safeguarding meeting, not loudly, not dramatically. Just enough for the body to release what the mind had been storing. The legal and regulatory aftermath continued for more than a year. Claire Sutton eventually admitted some conduct in relation to the locket, but continued denying the full pattern. The prosecution did not need her full honesty. Evidence is useful because it does not depend on the offender's generosity. The dealer's receipt showed one thing. The CCTV showed another. The phone records showed another. The care notes, visitor logs, diary, and GP assessment showed the shape around them. Other families provided accounts. Not every missing item could be traced, but the pattern was enough for consequences. When Claire was sentenced, Edith did not attend court. Martin offered. Joan offered to go with her. Edith thought about it and decided she had no desire to sit in a room where Claire would perform sorrow for strangers. Martin later summarized the outcome carefully. There was punishment. There was a criminal record. There were orders connected to compensation where possible. There were professional barriers to Claire working again with vulnerable adults. It was not everything. Nothing was ever everything. But it was official. That word mattered. Official meant Claire Sutton's version no longer stood unchallenged in the air. Official meant Edith's complaint was not a mood, not a symptom, not an old woman's fixation. Official meant that, if anyone tried to retell the story as confusion, there was a record that said otherwise. Rosebank House also paid compensation after negotiation. Patricia Rowe had resigned by then. Sandra Wells remained in care work, but under conditions, training, and supervision. The home received a critical inspection report of safeguarding weaknesses, poor documentation, insufficient response to allegations, and a culture that too readily attributed residents' concerns to cognitive decline. The language was dry. Edith found it oddly satisfying. "They write like people trying not to spill tea," Joan said when Martin read part of the report aloud. "Dry language lasts longer," Edith replied. She disliked that the report did not feel angry. Then she understood that perhaps it should not. Anger had carried her through the nights. Records would carry the truth farther. The compensation did not make Edith wealthy. Care fees have a way of swallowing sums that sound large to people not paying them. She used some to reimburse Joan's travel costs, which Joan fought with unnecessary drama. She bought a better reclining chair because pain did not become morally improving just because one had survived injustice. She replaced Thomas's lost locket with a simple silver pendant engraved with his initials and the date of their wedding. The pendant was not the same. It did not try to be. That was why Edith could wear it. The rest of the money she donated gradually, not all at once, to an advocacy project that helped older people in care maintain independent contacts and understand their rights. Martin told her she was under no obligation. "I know," Edith said. "That is what makes it mine." The first advocacy meeting Edith attended was held in a church hall near Brighton on a windy afternoon. Joan insisted on accompanying her, and then complained that the chairs were designed by someone with a grudge against spines. Hannah Price was there too, no longer in a Rosebank uniform, wearing a navy jumper and carrying a folder of training materials. She looked older than she had 6 months earlier, though she was still young enough to be shocked by how tiring truth could be. Edith had prepared 6 minutes of remarks. Joan had timed her with the severity of a school examiner. Martin had removed 2 phrases he said might create unnecessary legal complications. Edith had put one back because she liked it. When her name was called, Edith stood with her frame in front of nearly 40 people: residents, relatives, care workers, a local authority officer, 2 nurses, a social worker, and a reporter who had been told not to use names without permission. Her legs trembled. She let them. People often mistake steadiness for courage. Sometimes courage is allowing the tremor to be visible and continuing anyway. She did not begin with Claire Sutton. She began with Walter's medal. She described the small wooden box, the letters, the photograph, the locket, and the way objects can hold a person's place in the world when many of the people who knew that place are gone. She said, "Theft from an older person is often described in terms of money, but money is sometimes the least of it." She spoke of the phone calls that did not reach her, the visitor turned away, the diary hidden in Middlemarch, and the word confused, used so often it nearly became a lock. Then she paused. "The worst theft was not the medal or the locket," Edith said. "It was the attempt to take my word away from me." People should not require an old woman to recite poetry before believing she knows when something is missing. Care without respect is only management. And management without listening can become a very polite form of cruelty. The room was silent afterward. Then the applause came. It did not feel like pity. It felt like recognition. After the meeting, a man approached Edith with his daughter beside him. His wife was in a care home in Hove. A bracelet had gone missing, and staff had said she probably gave it away. He had accepted that because his wife did sometimes forget. Now he looked ashamed. "What do I do?" he asked. Edith did not give legal advice. Martin had warned her about that too. She said, "Write dates, ask for records, do not be embarrassed to ask twice, and do not let anyone make you feel rude for wanting facts." That became the sentence people repeated. Do not let anyone make you feel rude for wanting facts. Hannah later built it into a training slide without Edith's permission at first. Edith corrected the punctuation and allowed it. Claire Sutton wrote once from prison. Martin warned Edith that she did not have to read it. Joan offered to burn it ceremonially in the garden, though the new care home discouraged open flame. Edith read it once. Claire wrote about stress, debt, exhaustion, shame, and mistakes. She wrote that she had never meant for things to go so far. She wrote that Edith had reminded her of her grandmother. She wrote that prison had given her time to think. She did not write, plainly, "I stole from you," and then made people think you were losing your mind. Edith folded the letter. "Well?" Joan asked. "It is a letter from a woman who misses comfort. Do you forgive her?" Edith looked toward the window. "No," Joan nodded. Edith placed the letter in a folder marked Rosebank Matter. She did not keep it because she cherished it. She kept it because records had saved her once, and she no longer threw away evidence simply because it was unpleasant. Some people expected Edith to become softer after being vindicated. They imagined that once justice had officially recognized her, she would return to being the pleasant elderly woman who made dry remarks over tea. She did remain pleasant, often. She still thanked caregivers. She still asked after their children. She still shared biscuits. But something had changed in the way she occupied a room. She no longer apologized for asking who had entered her room. She no longer smiled when someone called her dear instead of answering her question. She no longer allowed professionals to speak about her as if she were furniture with a medical history. The new care home learned this quickly. Most staff respected it. A few found Edith difficult. That did not trouble her. Difficult, she decided, was sometimes the name given to older people who had stopped being convenient. Her friendship with Joan deepened in a way neither woman had expected so late in life. They had known each other for nearly 7 decades, yet the crisis revealed things they had never said. Joan admitted she had been frightened of losing Edith and ashamed that fear had made her hesitate at the Rosebank reception desk. Edith admitted she had wondered whether being childless had finally become the weakness people once predicted it would be. Joan was furious about that. "Children are not proof of love," she said. "I have met several who are proof of the opposite." Still, Edith said, people listen differently when a daughter stands beside the bed. "Then I shall become a daughter by force. You are older than I am. Then a senior daughter." They laughed until a caregiver looked in to make sure no one had fallen. Hannah Price visited when she could. She trained in adult safeguarding, then began working for an advocacy charity. At first, she sent Edith formal updates because she thought Edith might like to know her advice had mattered. Edith wrote back, with corrections, comments, and occasionally praise hidden so carefully Hannah had to read twice to find it. One letter from Hannah described a training session with new care workers. She had used a fictional case based on Edith's story. She told them about a diary hidden in a novel, a corrected poem, a phone that kept losing charge, a visitor log that lied, and a wooden box found behind supplies. I tell them safeguarding often begins when one person refuses to explain away a small wrong, Hannah wrote. Edith replied, "Good. Also tell them not to confuse calm notes with true notes. Wickedness can be written neatly." Hannah underlined that sentence and used it too. Edith lived the rest of her days with more visitors than she expected. Joan brought seaside rock, gossip, and complaints about bus timetables. Martin brought paperwork Edith pretended not to enjoy. Hannah brought poems. Sometimes local students came through the advocacy group to record residents' life stories, and Edith told them about the school office, Thomas's clocks, Walter's quiet courage, Joan's satchel in the cloakroom, and the day she learned that being old did not mean surrendering authorship of her own mind. She did not become fearless. That would be a lie. There were mornings when she woke certain she had heard Claire in the corridor. There were days when a missing comb made her heart race before it turned up under a towel. Trauma is not impressed by official outcomes. It lingers in the body after the paperwork is complete. But Edith became believed. That mattered more than people who have always been believed can understand. On her 83rd birthday, Joan arranged a small gathering in the care home's garden room. No fuss, Edith had said. Joan interpreted this as moderate fuss. There was sponge cake, tea, a vase of lavender, and a small clock Martin had found in an antique shop. It did not work. Edith laughed when she saw it. Thomas would have had that running by supper. "We thought you might like it anyway," Martin said. "I do." Later, after the others left, Edith sat alone with the broken clock on her lap. She thought about Rosebank House, but not for long. She thought about Walter's medal in its display case. She thought about Thomas's hands opening the backs of clocks. She thought about Joan in the foyer with lemon biscuits, turned away by a smiling woman. She thought about Hannah lowering the Tennyson sheet and letting an old woman finish the poem. The last time Edith held the Naval medal, she did not think of Claire Sutton. She thought of Walter standing on a dock in a photograph, young and solemn and unprepared for the things he would see. She thought of Thomas winding clocks in the back room. She thought of Joan saying, "I knew you were not confused." She thought of Hannah asking one more question. Those were the people who had come when Edith had nothing to offer but the truth. That is how dignity returns sometimes. Not all at once, not with trumpets. It returns through a charged phone, a believed sentence, a visitor allowed through the door, a diary taken seriously, a young worker brave enough to risk being unpopular, and a record that refuses to forget what people tried to hide. Claire Sutton had believed room 12 contained an old woman alone, with memories no one would defend. She was wrong. The memories had witnesses. And when the witnesses finally spoke, Edith Marlow was no longer a note in someone else's file. She was herself again.